Page 1 of your study guide for the Unit 8 evolution exam. Remember that your learning targets here were to be able to describe the basic concept of evolution, describe several lines of evidence for evolution, and how evolution takes place. So your mechanisms and your evidence, those are your two main ideas. Okay, so question number 1. Explain why over time large-jawed jaguars became present in the population. How were these adaptations passed from parents to offspring? Just trying to adjust how I want the camera here. Natural selection, okay, takes place through natural variation. So organisms with genes for characteristics that enable them to better survive will be able to pass those genes on to their offspring. We use the large-jawed jaguar example quite often because it's a really good example of how an organism who had a beneficial adaptation, such as having the large jaw, was able to utilize more food resources, live longer, and therefore have more fitness and have more babies and be able to pass that large-jawed characteristic on to their offspring. Number 2, what does the early embryonic stage of organisms tell us about evolution? Okay, so this is called comparative embryology, and this tells us that it supports evolution because it shows common ancestry. And I'm going to the page in your slideshow where we look at the embryos of a fish and a reptile and a bird and a human, and we see that everything has a tail, everything has gills. They all are kind of going through their whole evolutionary history as they're developing. So comparative embryology supports evolution by showing evidence of common ancestry. Charles Darwin's work brought him to 4 conclusions. 1, members of a population have heritable traits. So this is, how you inherit your characteristics from your parents. In a population, more individuals are produced than the environment can support. So this is going to lead to competition for food and resources. Number 3, some individuals are better able to survive and reproduce. This is called the survival of the fittest. And number 4, through natural selection, an increasing number of individuals in future generations will have adaptive traits. So if you have a trait that enables you to better survive in your environment, you're going to pass that on to your offspring. All right, number 4, define the following. An allele is an alternative form of a gene. We talked about that in Unit 6 and Unit 7. So big A, little a. Big A is one allele, little a is the other allele. And when you take this and put it through meiosis, they're going to separate, okay, independent assortment. So the offspring could get either a big A or a little a. A gene is a segment of DNA on a specific site on a chromosome that is responsible for the physical and inheritable characteristics of an organism. So there's a little drawing of chromosomes, and on a specific site for a chromosome, you might have the gene for hair color. Okay. I'm going to go over to page 2 just for a second because it continues with C and D. I want to finish this question. A trait is a feature of an organism. So you have a trait that is responsible for your phenotype. And an adaptation is the functional role of a trait that affects the ability of an organism to survive in their environment. So an adaptation is how that trait functions in a particular environment. All right, I'm going to pause here and go on to the next video.